Hey, what's up everybody? Mooner here, and I wanted to bring you guys a deck tech on my Icelander Stormbind Weathervane deck. It's a classic constructed deck, and I've been getting a lot of questions and comments on this deck, so I figured I would bring you guys a quick video going over the deck and the sideboard and some play lines and things like that, and explain why I chose Weathervane and how I play it. So thanks for joining me. If you like this kind of stuff, I plan on making more videos and going into more depth and detail on Icelander. So like and subscribe, whatever, that kind of stuff. If that's your thing, if not, who cares? Thanks for joining me anyways. This is a classic constructed deck for Icelander Stormbind. She's an elemental wizard hero with 4 intellect and 36 health. She has Essence of Ice. If it's not your turn, you may play blue non-attack action cards from your arsenal as though they were an instant. And whenever you play an ice card during your opponent's turn, create a frostbite token under their control. It's an incredibly powerful hero ability. Lets you play non-attacks from arsenal at instant speed and give your opponent frostbites. Really disrupt them on their turn, and it enables a lot of really nutty things, which I'm going to show you and go over. But you guys might be thinking, why Weathervane? A lot of the lists out there right now are running Michael Hamilton's Iyslander list, and while I think that is incredibly powerful and strong and a very consistent way to play Icelander, I prefer Weathervane. I've been playing this deck for quite some time, many months. I've been working on this deck for a long time. I built it from scratch. I've been playing Icelander since day one, and I've played every iteration of Icelander, and I've settled on Weathervane. It's my favorite way to play her. It is a very proactive way to play Icelander. You play primarily on your turn. The goal of this deck is to create as many frostbites and as much disruption on your turn as possible, and you're turning those frostbites into damage with cards like Frost Hex and Freezing Point, and you are basically trying to time walk your opponent every turn, not let them do anything, stall the game out until you can assemble some combo pieces and deal massive amounts of damage with like Frost Hex and Ice Veins and things like that, strip their hand of all their cards and let them take lots of chip damage through Frost Hex and other things. It's an incredibly disruptive way to play Icelander. Weathervane is really strong and really powerful, very explosive. It can lead to very short games, or Weathervane can stall the game out and take it quite long, to many turns. You can get the second cycle pretty easily if that's your plan, or you can end the game as early as turn 5. Weathervane is really good into the current meta, I think. Weathervane is really disruptive and very good into aggro. It's really good into tempo heroes. It's really good into Guardian if you know how to play the matchup correctly. It has less bad matchups than other Icelander decks, I think. It's really good into Dromai, Phi, Briar, Rhinar, Ranger. There's a myriad of reasons why I chose Weathervane, and with some practice and with some dedication to this deck, I think you guys are going to really like it. So let's get into the equipment. First we have our weapon, which is Waning Moon. It's the only weapon I use. Once per turn instant, to pay 2 resources, deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. If it's not your turn, instead deal 3 arcane damage to them. Activate this ability only if you've played a non-attack action card this turn. This deck, with the exception of a couple cards, only plays non-attack actions on your turn or from arsenal on your opponent's turn. So Waning Moon is always turned on. Being able to deal 2 damage on your turn and then 3 damage on your opponent's turn, 5 damage in a turn cycle is extremely powerful. It leads to a lot of situations where your opponent is faced with difficult decisions of blocking that damage, or letting frostbites stack up and not be able to do much on their turn. There's just too many reasons to name on why a Waning Moon is just really good and should be the only weapon you use in this deck. Next we'll move on to the head slot. we have Coronet Peak. Action, pay 3 resources. Target hero discards a card unless they pay 1 resource. It has Blade Break and blocks for 2. This is my main my main crown in the head slot, and being able to trade a blue card on your turn and force your opponent to discard a card unless they pay a resource or use their tunic resource is really, really strong. Stripping your opponent of resources, stripping your opponent of cards, forcing your opponent to start their turn on a 3-card hand is extremely powerful. It pretty much turns your opponent to data doll every turn that you use it, and it blocks for 2, which is really, really good. This deck doesn't block all that well, so having a head piece that blocks is pretty crucial. A lot of decks out there, Icelander decks and archetypes, are moving more towards Crown of Providence, and while I think that Crown is extremely powerful and really good, I choose Coronet Peak as my headpiece simply because it synergizes so much more with what Weathervane is trying to do, which is strip your opponent of resources and cards and really put them into lose situations of where you're disrupting them so much that they are unable to do anything turn after turn, and Coronet Peak really just synergizes with that game plan so much more. The only matchup I wouldn't use this in, other than the Wizard matchup, would be Oldhim. It's not really efficient to be peeking Oldhim. He can just get around that disruption and tax very efficiently with his own Crown of Seeds, and you're going to end up in a situation where you're not getting much value out of it. In that case, it is just a block and should be used for that reason pretty much only. The only other headpiece I run is Nullrune Hood, and I run this in the Wizard matchups against Kano and against Icelander. Just having access to extra Arcane Barrier is really important. For our chess piece, we run Feyndal Spring Tunic. Feyndal Spring Tunic is really the engine that facilitates this deck. Just being able to gain a resource every 3rd turn at instant speed is extremely important. It's what enables you to make huge plays. It's what enables you to sometimes pay for Waning Moon. It's what enables you to pay for your gloves for some extra block. It's what enables you to pay for large 2 Weathervane hands and things like that. I wouldn't run anything other than Tunic except for Alluvian Constellus, and the only matchup I bring Alluvian Constellus in is against Icelander in the Wizard Mirror. I run Tunic into Viserai, I think that's correct. I run Tunic into Kano, I think that's correct as well. You get a lot of value out of Tunic, much more than you do Alluvian Constellus in those matchups. There is even an argument to be made in this deck specifically not to run Alluvian Constellus in the mirror. A lot of Icelander players are playing the Bowlander variant, and you are not getting as much value out of Alluvian Constellus as you used to be, but having that extra Arcane Barrier is pretty important. So, I don't know, that's something I need to test a lot more. I haven't come to a final conclusion on whether Feyndal Spring Tunic or Alluvian Constellus is correct in the mirror, but currently I am still sticking with Constellus. Next we have our arm slot. Our main arm piece is Ironhide Gauntlet. Being able to block 2 for a single resource is really important in this deck. Like I said, it doesn't block all that well, and blocking critical on hits is really important. I choose Ironhide over Iron Rot because of the extra block, and I'm often left with a spare resource on my opponent's turn. By playing a lot of 0 cost from Arsenal and activating Waning Moon, I usually have a resource left over. By playing things like Channel like Frigid, which cost 2, I often have a resource left over. There's a lot of times, or from Tunic, you often have that extra resource where you're not using Tunic as often. So Ironhide is just a little bit more efficient than Iron Rot, but I understand the argument to run Iron Rot. But in this deck, Ironhide works just a little bit better, and it blocks more. Next, we run, the other arm piece I run is Metacarpus Node. Having the extra Arcane Barrier in certain matchups is really important, but it also lets you boost up some of your spells, and you'd be surprised how often that is important, mainly in the Dromai matchup. Having a single source of Arcane Barrier for Burn Them All can be important, but also being able to bump up some of your spells and get some of those breakpoints to kill certain dragons, namely Thamai and some of the larger majestic dragons is really important. So having access to Metacarpus Node in the Dromai matchup is really important. Also, bringing in against Viserai, just having single source of Arcane Barrier for Rune Chance. Against Briar, any excuse I have to play Metacarpus Node, I take advantage of. I love Metacarpus Node. Just being able to boost up your spells endgame can really push it over the line and be able to kill your opponent. And then lastly, we have our foot slot, which is our boots, our Stormstriders. It's the only boots I run. Without Stormstriders, Icelander wouldn't be nearly as explosive as she is. You could still run this deck without Stormstriders, but it just isn't as much fun. There isn't much to say about Stormstriders except for it is literally probably the most powerful equipment in the game. Being able to pay a resource and play any non-attack action card at instant speed anytime during the game is just ridiculously powerful. Being able to play red spells, yellow spells, any kind of spell on your opponent's turn at instant speed just lets you extend and kill them when they've overextended to try to kill you. There just isn't much to say. Don't run anything other than Striders. And that being said, that's all the equipment. Let's get into the main board. Alright, we have a 51 card main board here that never changes. These 51 cards always stay the same. It is the engine around which this deck operates and runs, and it is mainly centered around two cards, and that is Frosthex, well, three cards really, Frosthex, Weathervane, and Freezing Point. But I'll get into all that. Let's break it down first into the reds and the yellows. I run 6 yellows and 15 reds in the main board, and that might seem like a lot, but it works. And through extensive testing, this is the number I've set up on, and I'm really happy with it. I'm going to start with Weathervane. I run 3 yellow and 3 red. Weathervane is what this deck is built around. There's 6 in the main board, and the reds read, the next time you Ice Fuse, create 4 Frostbites under target hero's control, and the yellows read, the next time you Ice Fuse, create 3 Frostbites under target hero's control. And that is your main game plan. You are trying to play Weathervanes and fuse your spells every single turn, create as many Frostbites as you can on your opponent, and then use those Frostbites against them by not letting them play the game and then turning around and dealing damage to them as high as possible, as much damage as possible. And this deck can facilitate a lot of damage through Weathervane, as well as a lot of disruption. Being able to disrupt your opponent, stop them from playing the game, and then turn around and use those Frostbites against them to deal them massive amounts of damage is what makes this deck so fun and so difficult to play against. But we'll get into the spells now. The red spells, I run 3 Freezing Point. This is your most powerful spell in the deck. This is the spell that you should be trying to play at all costs for as much value as you possibly can. At face value, this card is pretty below rate. 3 resources for 5 arcane damage is not really great, but the floor on this card, while it might be 5 at face value, should be around 8. You shouldn't be playing Freezing Point for any less than 8 damage in combined with a Weathervane. The way that works is Freezing Point checks on the layer stack the amount of frostbites that are created from Weathervanes. So if you play a Weathervane and then fuse a Freezing Point, it is going to check the frostbites that are created from Weathervane and then tack on those to Freezing Point. And the way Freezing Point reads is deal 5 arcane damage to target hero. If Freezing Point was fused, instead deal X damage to that hero, where X is 5 plus the number of frostbites, ice afflictions, and frozen cards they control. So it is checking the frostbites that are created by fusing Freezing Point from Weathervane, and it is tacking on those frostbites to the damage. So combining Freezing Point with a yellow or a red Weathervane is going to deal 5 plus 3 or 5 plus 4, and any other ice afflictions like Frost Hex or Hypothermias that your opponent might control at the time, frozen cards off of an encase or something like that, or their card frozen in their arsenal from other things this deck can do, can really tack on that damage, and you can very easily get freezing points up into the 20s with a little bit of practice. But like I said, the floor of this card should be 8. You shouldn't be playing this card unless you're combining it with a yellow Weathervane and dealing 8 damage, but ideally higher. Next we have Encase. I run 3 copies of Encase. It's a 0 for 3 with Ice Fusion, and if it was fused and deals damage to a hero, freeze that hero and all equipment they control until the start of your next turn. This is incredibly powerful, and it's usually a must block for your opponent. Fusing this can put your opponent in some really bad situations. If you freeze all their equipment and their hero, that's just going to add an additional 5 damage to freezing points, sometimes more if they're running like a lantern or something like that, or a shield. It can be 6, but freezing the hero ability and all their equipment should not be discounted. It is really strong. Freezing things like their boots, like their Snapdragon Scalers, or any of their equipment really, locking them out of their tunic resource for a turn is really strong. Freezing their headpiece or their arm piece so that they can't activate it. Usually, like I said, it's going to be blocked, but in those situations where they are running lower AB and it gets through, it's devastating. Devastating against Rangers. Lexi, she can't use her hero ability and flip over her cards. Azalea, she can't use her hero ability. She can't use her headpiece. A lot of different heroes are affected by it, but a lot of different heroes aren't. A lot of different heroes don't care if their hero ability is frozen because they have passive abilities, and that's okay. But in the matchups where Encase matters, it really hurts, and that's why it's a main board card. Also because it is a 0 for 3, so combining it with Weathervanes is extremely efficient and extremely easy. You can usually combine Encase with 2 or 3 Weathervanes, give them insane amounts of frostbites, and force them to ditch a card in order to block the Encase to not be further disrupted. But if they are silly enough to let it hit, and you are lucky enough to top deck a freezing point, you can get your freezing points up to 23, 27 damage quite easily. And for that reason, Encase does make it into the main board. Next we have Polar Cap. I run 3 copies of red Polar Cap. It's a 2 for 4 with Ice Fusion, and if it deals any damage, creates an additional frostbite, but it synergizes exceptionally well with Weathervane. Being able to play a Weathervane and then a Polar Cap off of 1 blue and a fuse card is really strong. Off of a red, you're creating 4 and then an additional frostbite from the Polar Cap hitting if they are not running AB4. I've found that the majority of decks that play against me usually only run AB3 or lower, so Polar Cap is almost always hitting. It's almost always creating additional frostbites. It's synergizing exceptionally well with Weathervane to create 3, 4, 5 frostbites. It's dealing damage. Polar Cap is just really good in this deck. I would never run this deck without it, and for that reason it's main board. Next we have 6 cards that should be played in every single Icelander list, no matter what, and that is red and yellow Aether Icevein, 4 and 5 arcane damage for 3, with an on hit of if it is fused, your target hero discards target hero discards a card unless they pay 2 resources. This effect in this card just synergizes so well with this deck. Pairing it with Weathervanes, giving them many frostbites, forcing them to discard a card, or pay 2 resources, dealing damage. It's just, there isn't much to say about Aether Icevein except for it's just one of the most goated spells in the game. It's incredibly disruptive. It's always going to hit. It's always going to force your opponent to discard a card. The only reason I don't run the blues in this deck is because it's just too easily blocked, and 3 damage for 3 resources that's too easily blocked just doesn't synergize that well in this deck, but the red and the yellows do, and for that reason they are main boarded. Alright, let's get into the blues of the main board. These blues never change, and I'll explain why all of them are in the deck for certain reasons. This deck is essentially a Frost Hex deck. This deck synergizes very well. Frost Hex, you are trying to get as many Frost Hexes out on your opponent as possible, because you are giving them so many Frostbites and disrupting them so much that those Frostbites turn around and deal massive amounts of damage to your opponent every turn. You play Frost Hex at all costs. You play it on your turn. You play it on your opponent's turn. You take damage to play Frost Hex, but you play it. You don't block with it. Sometimes you pitch it if you expect the game to go long and late to second cycle and you think you're going to see it again. You can get away with playing 1 or 2 on your opponent because you're creating so many frostbites on them every turn, but 3 is just ridiculous. If you can get 3 on your opponent, you're going to end the game really quickly. It is a blue block 3 ice card, which does come into effect. I mean, I don't block with this card very often unless I absolutely have to, and I already have 1 or 2 frost hexes on my opponent. But you play this card as quickly and as fast as possible. Next we have the second most important blue in the deck, which is Insidious Chill. Coming into play with 3 frost counters on it, and anytime you ice fuse, you must remove a frost counter, and your opponent must discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. There isn't much to say about Insidious Chill, except for it just really synergizes with what this deck is trying to do. You're trying to give your opponent frostbites, like I said, and you're trying to strip their hand so that they can't do anything. And then you were trying to make those frostbites deal damage to your opponent, and Insidious Chill just works so well into that plan. You are ice fusing almost every turn. Every spell except for a couple in this deck fuse. You are not saving your chills for specific things like other Icelander decks might be doing. You are using these chills as often and efficiently as possible. You want to get chills down. You want to fuse. You want to strip your opponent. You want to combine your red spells and your yellow spells with Weathervanes. You want to give your opponent frostbites. You want to strip their hand with ice veins and chills, and you just want to basically give your opponent a really, really bad time at playing the game. I call it time walking them. And Insidious Chill helps facilitate that plan like no other card in the deck. So much so that I run. Next up, we have 3 Amulet of Ice. It's basically the same thing as a chill, only it costs 0. It's an item, so it doesn't block. And you can activate this at instant speed. So where Insidious Chill is a must, anytime you ice fuse, it procs. Amulet of Ice doesn't. You can choose when it procs, just as long as you had ice fused that turn. So it gives you a little more agency over when you strip their hand and how you strip their hand. And for that reason, I play 3 of them. It comes out of Arsenal really well giving your opponent a frostbite, and then as soon as you start developing chills and amulets, you're going to have a much easier time into your opponent. Because like I said, all of these spells fuse, so where your chills are going to proc automatically, you can choose when and where you proc your amulets, and it really puts your opponent in a bad position. So I wouldn't play any less than 3. Next we have Channel Lake Frigid. I play 3 Channel Lake Frigid. There isn't much to say about Channel, except for it is just one of the most disruptive cards in the game. Certain decks, this Channel Lake Frigid is absolutely devastating and backbreaking to, forcing your opponent to pay an additional resource for every card and activated ability they try to do on their turn or your turn or whenever is backbreaking. Certain decks aren't as affected by it as others, but it is a blue block 3 ice card, and for that reason it is main decked. You don't really want to play this card into Guardians. Other certain matchups like Belittle Phi can get around Channel Lake Frigid pretty easily, same thing as Belittle Briar, but certain decks this channel is just devastating. Just like I said, taxing your opponent for everything they do can be backbreaking. There are instances where you don't really want to be taking a lot of damage to play channel. There are certain matchups that it isn't as efficient. Like I said, it is a blue block 3 ice card, so for that reason it is main decked. Next in the blues, I'm going to clump these guys together because, let's just move some space over here. I'm going to clump these guys together because they're pretty much the same card, and that is 3 copies of Polar Blast and 3 copies of Cold Snap. This card is insane. If there was ever a card that I would suspect they would try to nerf Icelander with, it would be Cold Snap or Polar Blast. Having 6 copies of this in the deck is just cracked. Being able to play this from Arsenal for 1 resource, give your opponent a frostbite, and it replaces itself by letting you draw a card is just broken. Leaves you pitch a blue, it leaves you with 2 resources left over in order for you to Waning Moon. It turns on your Waning Moon. It replaces itself, it gives your opponent a frostbite. Polar Blast text block is pretty much blank. It's blank in this deck, honestly, but Cold Snap is a different story. Target hero may pay 1 resource. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control till the start of your next turn. This is great into Dromai, freezing Kyloria or any other pesky dragon, freezing their arsenal. That frozen card does go towards the damage dealt by freezing point, so there are some tricky little plays where you can play a Cold Snap, freeze a couple things, give them a frostbite, play a freezing point as your kill with Striders, and it's going to count those frozen cards towards its damage. But the fact that it lets you cycle through your deck 6 cards faster, get to your more important cards like your Frost Hexes and your freezing points faster, get through your deck 6 cards quicker, is just, I mean, this card is busted. It really is. And like I said, if there was ever a card that they were going to nerf Icelander with, Cold Snap would be my guess, or would be my vote. I would hate to see that happen because of how much I absolutely love it. So much so that I play Polar Blast as well, but it's just incredibly powerful, and I would never play less than 6 or 3 of each. Next we have, I'm going to talk about these spells because they are the least efficient spells in the deck, and that is 3 copies of Frosting and 3 copies of Aether Hail. Now, I will go on the record and say Aether Hail is the worst card in the deck. It's the worst card in the main board, and it's the card that if I could, I would cut, but unfortunately, I can't. It is a blue block 3 ice card, same with Frosting, and for that, it is just good enough to make the cut into the main deck. Being able to block 3 blue and Ice Fuse is very important, but Aether Hail costs 1, and it only deals 2 arcane damage, and you don't really want to be playing this on your opponent's turn. This card is mainly used to block, fuse, and pitch, and And that's pretty much it. There are some times when you get stuck with a hand where this has to go into Arsenal and you are forced to play it. And in those cases, you're not really happy because you don't want to be spending resources on your opponent's turn, especially to deal minimal damage and just give them a single frostbite, unless there are some niche situations where that, damage can be multiplicative, that frost, it could be a kill turn or something like that. But with some practice in this deck, you'll come to understand that Aether Hail is the last card you want to be arsenaling. You don't want to be paying for it on your opponent's turn. You mainly want to be blocking with it, pitching it, and fusing with it. But Frosting is a little bit better because it is 0 cost, and 0 cost cards from Arsenal are very, very good because they don't take any resources from you. It can give your opponent a Frostbite and deal them 1 arcane damage, which is okay, but you don't want to be paying for too many things from Arsenal unless it's a Cold Snap or a Channel or something like that. And playing 0 cost from Arsenal is where you want to be at. And Frosting's pretty good, so Frosting makes the main deck. The last 6 cards we're going to talk about are, let's make some space here. Ice Eternal. Ice Eternal is a 3-of in this deck. It is a blue, block 3. It is an elemental wizard action, so it's not an ice card, but it does have Ice Fusion. And Ice Eternal is your most versatile card in the deck. Ice Eternal can do it all, except for fuse other cards. But Ice Eternal, I'm going to read it off. It says it has Ice Fusion and create X Frostbites tokens under target hero's control, and then Ice Eternal was fused, deal arcane damage equal to that hero equal to the number of frostbites they control. Now Ice Eternal doesn't care how many frostbites it itself creates. Ice Eternal only cares how many frostbites your opponent controls. So that being said, Ice Eternal synergizes exceptionally well with Isenhowl Weathervane. You can play Ice Eternal for 0 off of a Weathervane, and it's going to check how many frostbites were created by Weathervane and then deal damage to them. Or you can just play a Weathervane and then pump resources into Ice Eternal, creating more frostbites. Ice Eternal gets played for 0 a lot. Ice Eternal gets played as a finisher from Arsenal. Ice Eternal gets played on your own turn quite a bit, creating, paired with 2 or 3 Weathervanes, creating many, many frostbites, and then fusing it to deal all that damage to your opponent. Ice Eternal gets followed up after a huge freezing point. Ice Eternal gets followed up after another Ice Eternal in a late game if you're pitching them. Ice Eternal blocks really well. Ice Eternal, like I said, is just your most versatile card in the deck. This card can just do so much. The floor of this card is massive. The ceiling of this card is massive. This deck isn't built around Ice Eternal, but the way it synergizes with just every other card in the deck is just exceptional. And with some practice, Ice Eternal will become one of your favorite cards to draw, to block with, to pitch, just whatever. It can do it all. And the last 3 cards we're going to talk about in the main deck are Energy Potion. I run 2. Energy Potion is also one of the most important cards in the deck. Getting an Energy Potion out just makes you feel like you can do anything, which you can. Energy Potion helps facilitate up to 2 or 3 Weathervanes in a turn. Energy Potion helps boost up your Ice Eternals. Energy Potion helps you play just about anything in the deck as efficiently as possible, and you should be playing an Energy Potion at all costs. Sometimes you pitch it, but if you can get an Energy Potion out, all you need is 1, and if you can get it out, you can make huge, massive plays that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to, and for that reason, it's probably my favorite card in the deck. It's probably one of my favorite cards in the game. Just being able to gain 2 resources at instant speed that you can use for anything is just really, really important in the wizard matchups, and just every single matchup. Energy Potion is important. Being able to start the game with an Energy Potion and play turn 1 is just setting yourself up for just success. Your chances of winning that game skyrocket exponentially. Being able to hold a 4-card hand and play and play a channel like Frigid from Arsenal just by using your energy potion, being able to play 2 Weathervanes and play an Aether Icevein from an energy potion, and it's just massive. It lets you make just crazy plays that if you watch some of my gameplay, you'll see how important energy potion is. I only run 2 because all you need is 1. You're going to see it, and you don't ever want to draw 2 in the same hand. That can be bad. So that's the only reason I run 2 instead of 3, even though it is such an important card in the game, in the deck. But getting an energy potion out just makes you feel like you're going to win the game, and you probably are. The last card I want to talk about in the main deck is a hot button topic, and that is Heart of Feyndal. And Heart of Feyndal is, well, there's a lot to say about Heart of Feyndal. Mainly, is it necessary? That's the question I get asked the most. And while I don't think it is 100% necessary, I do think it is really, really good. Heart of Feyndal, just starting the game at a lower life total means Heart of Feyndal is going to gain you life when you pitch it. It's going to help you stay alive. You end up taking a lot of damage in this deck sometimes, and Heart of Feyndal helps to even that out and keep you alive. The amount of games that I go to 1 life are far more than I'd care to admit, and sometimes the only reason I win and survive that game is because of Heart of Feyndal. Now, if you don't have it, like, is there something else I would run? Yeah, definitely. If you don't have it, you can put another energy potion in the deck and you'll probably be just fine. Or you can sideboard in one of the sideboard slots and you'll probably be just fine. But if you do have Heart of Feyndal, I highly suggest running it and playing it. It really does. Icelander uses Heart of Feyndal better than any other hero, I think. Just starting at that lower life total, you want to be pitching blues anyways. This deck doesn't really want to be blocking, so the non-block value doesn't matter. And gaining that life is really important. It also is a really good card if you draw it early to use as a marker. If you're planning on having the game go long, it's a good marker for getting to your second cycle. If you draw it in the first couple hands. If you draw it late game, it can save your life by, gaining you that extra life that you really need. I've never really been in a situation where Heart of Feyndal wasn't beneficial to me. But like I said, if you don't have it, run another energy potion. If you do have it, please put it in your deck. You won't regret it. And that is the 51 card main deck. Alright. Okay, I'm going to go over the sideboard guide everybody's been asking about. Like I said before, I run a 51 card main deck that never changes. All 51 of those cards go into every single matchup. And then out of these 21 cards that I have in my sideboard, I bring in 9 cards to supplement the rest of the deck. Depending on the matchup, all nine of these cards come from the sideboard. Everything else stays the same. The first 6 I'm going to talk about are Blue Brain Freeze and Blue Icebind. These are going to be cards number 52, 53, and 54 in every single matchup. You're going to bring in one of these 2 cards. It's important to have a high density of fused cards in the deck, of cards that can be fused and that you can tack on with Weathervanes and things like that. And these are really important because they are blue block 3s and they come out of Arsenal. It's just one of these is going to be good in certain matchups and the other one is going to be good in the others. Brain Freeze is really good in aggro matchups and on a lot of other matchups that are going to run a lot of 0-cost cards. A lot of matchups that this is going to target, such as Fi and Briar, and matchups like that. Dash is really good into. Icebind is good into everything else. Things that you might want to freeze their arsenal, which is relevant. This is really good into Ranger, forcing them to deal with 1 Arcane just to have their arsenal not frozen. This is really good into Guardian, decks that don't really care about 0-cost cards. But so you're going to pick either Icebind or Brain Freeze as 52, 53, and 54. And then it's important to have a high density of ice cards to fuse. So I either run Isenhowl Weathervane, Arctic Incarceration, or Hypothermia. All blues. They are all 2 blocks, so that is important to keep in mind, but they are all ice cards, so they do fuse. Isenhowl Weathervane comes into just about every single matchup. The only matchup I don't really bring it into is Dromai. That's why it's in the sideboard. Other than that, I usually run at least 2 in every single matchup. And Arctic Incarceration and Hypothermia both play a pretty similar role. Hypothermia comes into the aggro matchups where you're going to expect a lot of unnatural go-again, such as Dash, Briar, decks like I bring it into the Bullander Icelander matchup where you're going to expect a lot of Scar for Scars and a lot of E-Strikes and things like that. It also comes in for some Guardian matchups like Oldhim, who's going very high aggro with Zealous Beltings and E-Strikes and things like that. Hypothermia is pretty good in there. Arctic Incarceration comes in for matchups where you just think an extra 2 Frostbites might be just disruptive enough. I bring this in for Phi. I don't bring Hypothermia in for Phi. He doesn't rely on too much unnatural go-again. Most of his stuff already has go-again on it, so I find Arctic Incarceration is just enough disruption for that. And then next we have Exposed to the Elements. 3 copies of Exposed to the Elements. This comes in for all the Wizard matchups. Being able to expose their boots in the Kano matchup is just devastating. Usually only bring 2 copies in, sometimes 3, depending. In the Kano matchup, 3 is fine because it is still a blue. Even though it doesn't block, it doesn't matter. It can block arcane damage with being a blue. But being able to expose all of Kano's equipment, you can take away his hat and his boots. You can pretty much take away all of his equipment with exposed and shut Kano down pretty much in his tracks. He really can't do much after that. This also comes into the Icelander matchup. I usually bring 2 copies in. Having 3 can be a little tricky. You don't want to get caught with 2 in hand at the same time. But in the Icelander matchup, you want to expose Alluvian Constellus first, and then you want to take out the boots second if you still, have the opportunity to do so. But as long as you get rid of Alluvian Constellus, they are not going to get that much value out of all the arcane damage you're dealing, and they have fewer ways to break your frostbites. So Exposed comes in for there, and Exposed also comes in, it's a very important card in the Odin matchup. Odin can use his Crown of Seeds to break your frostbites, and that is really bad. So you want to bring 3 copies of Exposed into the Odin matchup, and you want to expose his crown as soon as possible. I've found that a lot of Odin players, I've never had issues exposing the crown. He is very good at overextending into Icelander. And as soon as you possibly can, just get rid of his crown, and you're going to have a lot easier time in the Odin with this deck. Otherwise, you're going to have to dance around his crown and him breaking all your frostbites, and it's just going to be a bad time. And the last 3 cards in the sideboard are 2 Feyndal's Fighting Spirit, yellow. I chose yellow because of the pitch value, and it's still a 6. It is by far the best popper in the game. We started at lower life, so you're going to gain that life from Feyndal's Fighting Spirit by defending with it. This only comes in for the Dromai matchup, and that's it. Some people run CNC, but I think Feyndal's Fighting Spirit yellow is just the best popper in the game because it'll gain you a life. And then the last card in the sideboard is 1 copy of Nourishing Emptiness. I bring this card in to a lot more matchups than you might think. Any matchup, I expect a lot of high arcane barrier and low equipment defense. I bring Nourishing Emptiness into. Being able to get off a Nourishing Emptiness can just pretty much set you up to win the game. This deck can do crazy nutty things with a card in arsenal and 5 cards in hand. You can just have some of the most highly explosive and biggest plays you can imagine. Multiple Isenhowl Weathervane turns. Just absolutely nutty things can be enabled by Nourishing Emptiness. Being able to get one off and get that extra intellect is just backbreaking to some decks, and it can just win you the game pretty much on the spot. There's some great gameplay video I have posted where Nourishing just enables massive plays. So a lot of times this will be card number 61 that I will bring into some matchups. Matchups, like I said, I expect high arcane barrier and low equipment blocking. I bring it into Phi. Sometimes you'll get lucky and he won't want to let this hit, and so he'll throw his mask or his Shuko in front of it. You can get some tunics with this. You can get some pretty good equipment with this. I bring it into the Rhinar matchup. I bring it into the Odin matchup and the Bravo matchup. All the matchups I expect high AB. Nourishing Emptiness comes in. If you expect a lot of a lot of equipment, high blocking equipment like Briar or something like that, Runeblade, don't bring in Nourishing Emptiness. It's just going to be a dead card in your hand or a 3-block. And you don't need any red dead cards. So, like I said, there is a full sideboard guide with every matchup that will be in this video. If you guys like stuff like this, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to be doing some Kano videos, gameplay videos, and some Emperor videos in the very near future. This is going to be an all-wizard channel with all-wizard content going forward. So if this is something you like, I'm just starting out at this. This is a very new thing for me. I didn't expect to be like a content creator or anything, but if there is a desire to see stuff like this, I'll keep making it. So thanks for watching, guys, and good luck. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask. I will be willing to answer anything. All right, thanks a lot.